Hello everyone. This is part 2 of the first lecture. In last lecture, we ended with a discussion on major demands mentioned in the Magna Carta. Now let us look how Magna Carta and its principle inspired American and British constitutions. We will try to look at the due process, trial by jury, protection against excessive fines, and rule of law. These are the ideas which the American Constitution adopted from the Magna Carta. In British Constitution, only two of these ideas were exactly adopted. So let us look at them one by one. Now first let us understand the concepts, the ideas in detail, then we will be ready to discuss the clauses, exact clauses. We will try to translate the language and try to get the idea. Now let us discuss due process. Now before understanding due process, we must get introduced with another concept that is known as procedure established by law. An understanding of this principle or this idea, this concept, will make us appreciate the due process. Now, as we already know that in ancient and medieval world, kings held supreme power and authority. So whatever laws they made, whatever rules they made, were followed and enforced by the police and officers. Of course, kings were having the administration, and the army. So this army was mostly meant for the war and for extreme purposes. We'll talk mainly about the administration and officers under the administration and the police. Now let us understand with a case study. Let us say in a kingdom, the king made a rule that anyone who commits a murder would be given a death penalty. A very simple rule. So anyone who commits a murder is given a death penalty. This is the crime. This is the punishment. Now king has passed this order and king's order is a law. Why king's order is a law? Because he is the authority, he is the supreme authority of the land. Whatever he says, whatever he orders is the law of the land. So this is the rule, or this is the law. Rule or law. Let us hide it a little. So the king made the law. Now the administration is responsible to enforce these laws. Enforce means to take care whether these laws are properly implemented and are followed by the people. Let me rub this. Now, under the law, a procedure is established, which means whenever there is a law made that a particular crime will lead to a particular punishment. Now, how will you decide whether the crime was committed or who committed the crime, and then to punish him with the punishment that has been decided for that crime? So the procedure is there that should be followed to find who is guilty. So under the law, a procedure has been established of how to find who is guilty. This procedure tells how to find the guilty man. Now let me tell you a very short story so that you will get a better idea. So let us say that in the kingdom there was a knife maker who makes knives, and one day he was holding a bunch of knives in his hand in a market. He was showing it to a rich wealthy merchant. There is a rich wealthy merchant he was showing the knives to this merchant. This merchant liked his knife and wanted to buy those knives. The knife maker is very skilled knife maker. So merchant wants to buy these knives and sell it for higher price somewhere else. The wealthy merchant would have given enough money, would have paid them enough, which would have made the knife maker rich. But suddenly it started to rain. So it started to rain, and the knife maker and the merchant both ran for a shelter. When they were running, they had to cross a muddy road. The mud was wet, so suddenly knife maker slipped in the mud, and also the merchant. By some coincidence, one of the knife which was in the hand of this knife maker pierced into the merchant's heart, which killed him. Now there were few officers nearby. These officers saw blood in knife maker's hand, and he was holding knives. So they concluded that he killed the merchant out of greed. Now the knife maker pled. He cried out loud that why would he kill the merchant? Because merchant was going to give a lot of money to the knife maker. But they didn't listen to him. They were giving strict instructions by the administration that there is a procedure that has to be followed strictly. The procedure to find the guilty one. Now the procedure states that if the murder weapon is found in someone's possession, so in whose possession is the murder weapon? Knife maker's possession. He would be considered a murderer, and that should be enough of the evidence. Now because of this, the knife maker was killed. He was executed. Now in this story, you see, there was no one to hear the knife maker's side. The king ordered the administration. The administration has to enforce the law. Administration saw that in the law there is a procedure given how to find someone guilty, and the knife maker was executed. Let me make a little space here. Now this particular method is an example of a system which follows the concept of administrative adjudication. Administrative adjudication. Adjudication means the action or the process of judging something, which means to hear both the parties, and then make a judgment. Administrative adjudication is a term given to this kind of system where the law has given the administration the power to judge or adjudicate on the basis of the procedure. The procedure was mentioned in the law. So we see that the king made a law. The law mentions procedure, and the adjudication is done by the administration. The administration gave officers specific directions. Administration had a blueprint, a procedure. They had to follow that. Therefore, they adjudicated or they concluded using the procedure. The procedure mentioned that if you find the murder weapon in the possession of someone, then he will be judged a culprit. Now let us see what are the flaws, what are the problems with this system. The biggest problem is that the administration can be corrupted. The officers could be corrupted, the police could be corrupted. They have been just given a procedure and they have to follow that. But the power to judge, this judgment power to hear the parties and provide the judgment, has been given to the administration. So the administration can become biased. or they can be bribed. They can also become oppressive. They can torture people. They can blackmail, threaten people. Why? Because they hold the power to judge. They can hear any person and judge over them whether they are guilty or not. What if they don't follow a procedure? King would never know, because the king has vested the authority, the power of this judgment on the administration. Now let us take one more case where the procedure also mentions that before finding someone guilty, or before deciding, or before judging that the accused or the person the suspect has done the crime is guilty, in the procedure it is written that the administration can keep the suspect in jail or in prison until the judgment, and then whenever the administration wants, they can find whether he is guilty or not, whether he is guilty. In this particular case, the procedure also mentions a discretion to put someone in the prison, to imprison someone. Now what is the problem here? Now it is up to the administration. They can imprison anyone for any length of time. It is just their discretion. It is a lot of authority given to the administration. Now the common people, not even the accused, are having threat. If administration likes to imprison someone, it can do. It can ask for ransom by threatening the common people that if you don't pay us, we will imprison you. So you can see the government can become corrupt, and if there is power, and if this is the system, it can very well get corrupt and it can lead to tragedy. This is a very flawed system. This system is having so many disadvantages. So the idea they are following is that they are running according to the procedure established by law. There was a law, it established a procedure, and they followed it as it was. Now because this system created a lot of problems for everyone, so one of the demands in Magna Carta was clause 39. Now clause 39 mentions that no freeman is to be arrested or imprisoned or decised. Decised means to wrongfully or illegally take someone's property, or occupation. So no freeman is to be arrested or imprisoned or decised or outlawed or exiled or in any other way ruined, nor will we go against him or send against him. To send against him means we won't send administration against him or police against him. So no freeman is to be arrested. Means nobody should be. No freeman means no citizen should be arrested or imprisoned. You can't imprison anyone, you can't arrest anyone, except there is a condition. If you want to arrest someone, the condition is only by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. You will have to have a lawful judgment either by the peers. Peers means his countrymen, his fellow countrymen. These can be his neighbors or the same people in the town or the village, or by the law of the land. which means the judgment should always follow the law of the land. Now, this law of the land were traditional rules and regulations which were followed by the people generally. For example, a soldier who died for the country in a war should never be disrespected, or his family should never be disrespected. Now, you don't have to make a law. The king doesn't have to make this law, it is kind of a belief or a tradition. So, such kind of laws were there which were believed by or followed by the people, or such laws which were already in existence. We don't have to go so much into details, but you get the idea that now, under the Magna Carta, under this clause, people wanted a lawful judgment. Now, see what has changed. Now that the judgment depends on peers and the law of the land, which means there is no more administrative adjudication. Other thing, now because the judgment involves peers and the law of the land has to be followed, which means he will get heard. The knife maker will be heard. The court will have to listen to him. He can keep his side of the story, which means there is a guarantee to be heard, where he can defend himself. This is known as due process, or rather, it is a very primitive idea of due process. Previously, the idea was that there is a procedure which is established under the law which has to be followed. Doesn't matter how is the procedure. Now, under the due process, you can't imprison anyone until and unless there is a rightful judgment and the accused has been given a chance to be heard. He can present his case, he can defend himself in the court. Now, what are the two things which have been demanded in clause 39? First of all, a person cannot be arrested without a judgment. And the judgment is passed by whom? The peers and the law of the land. Now let us look at the meaning of this term, due process. Due means something that is supposed to happen and hasn't happened till now, or pending, or something which is supposed to happen. Or is expected to happen. A process simply means the literal meaning of process, but here specifically it means being heard by an impartial court. Now, of course, at that time, when Magna Carta was signed by the king, it was not known as due process. This term was given later. And why is the term given due process? Which means even though there are laws established and procedure established, but the authority has to provide something else which is pending, which is the process of being heard by a court, a competent court, or in the case of Magna Carta, accused, heard by the peers of the person who is accused. This is the basic meaning of this word. Now, over the time, the meaning and the interpretation has evolved. Even the idea itself has evolved, expanded in its scope. At first, due process demanded that there is a process which is due, which is to be followed. What is that process? That process is giving chance to the accused to get heard or to defend himself. But over the time, it evolved and now it includes the principles of natural justice. Now, what is natural justice? We will learn in the upcoming lectures in detail. But to give you a glimpse of what we are going to study later, Let me tell you how America interprets this due process as an idea. So in America, this concept or this principle of due process includes right to be informed of the charges, which means what are the charges against you. The government or the authority has to inform you of the charges against you, and of course to be heard by a competent authority, to be heard by a unbiased, competent, impartial court. Competent court. And this means that the accused has the right to defend himself because he is being heard by a competent authority. He is being heard. He has a chance to keep his side of the story, and therefore he can defend himself. The principle, along with these ideas, also even includes an inspection where the procedure which was established by the law is fair or not. The requirement that the procedure which was established by the law should be fair. And what does fair means? Fair means it should not be tending towards one party, or it should not be biased towards the government. The procedure should not be one-sided, which means it should not be tough for the accused to follow that procedure, or it should not be heavy on the accused. Whatever procedure is mentioned in the law should be fair. Even you can say that the punishment which is mentioned under the law should not exceed the seriousness of his crime, which means that there should not be any advantage to the authority or even to the accused. It should be fair, it should be equal for both of them. The authority should be able to press charges, but the accused should be able to defend it equally. Both sides should be given equal chance. That is the fair procedure. Like in our example, we saw that the procedure involved that the authorities can keep the accused imprisoned for as long as they want. This is in the favor of the administration. Now, what is a fair thing? What is an impartial thing? How to make it equal? To make it equal or fair or impartial, the accused should be given a protection that as soon as possible after the arrest, he should be presented in front of a competent authority. So the administration can press charges and the accused has his chance of defending himself. He won't have to suffer being in the jail or being imprisoned. So it becomes a fair procedure. So here you can see the procedure itself is checked, or there are limits. A condition has been put on the procedure that it should be fair. Now in India, this principle of due process is not written in the constitution, but later we will see when we look at Article 21 of the Constitution in the upcoming lectures. We will see how Supreme Court made due process a part of our constitution. Supreme Court in a judgment stated that the procedure established by law, along with being fair, it should be fair, but should be also just and reasonable, which is the whole concept of due process. Now this principle of trial by jury, this also comes from clause 39, where it is mentioned that the judgment will include fellow countrymen. So two of the principles are derived from clause 39. Now look at clause 20. A free man is not to be amerced. Amerced means to punish with a fine. Punish with fine. So simply to fine. So a free man is not to be amused, not to be fined for a small offense except in proportion to the nature of the offense, which means a person cannot be fined more than what he should be fined according to the offense he committed. If the offense is small, the fine should be small. It should be in the proportion of the offense. And for a great offense, he is to be amused in accordance with its magnitude. So the magnitude of the offense would decide how much fine he has to give, saving to him his livelihood. The fine should not take away his livelihood from him, which means he should not be burdened with such fines that will lead to the loss of his livelihood. And a merchant, in the same manner, saving him his stock in trade, which is to say simply that a merchant should also be fined considering the amount of money he would need. It should not take away his business. And a villain means villain is also a kind of peasant. So a villain is to be amused in the same manner, saving to him his growing crops, which means the peasant should not be fined so that he loses his crops or he is left with no money to grow his crops again if they fall into our mercy, which means it is the king. The king is saying that under him this will happen. A man will be only fined in proportion of his offense and will not be fined so that he will lose his means of living, and none of the aforesaid amusement is to be imposed except by the oath of trustworthy men of vicinity. Now men is plural here, which is very similar to this concept of judgment by peers, which means that the fine imposed should be approved by trustworthy peers or men of the vicinity. Of the vicinity means who live in the same town or same village, who are nearby, who live nearby. Those trustworthy men should be the one who would decide what kind of fine or what level of fine should be imposed on a particular individual. So from here comes the protection against excessive fine. This is a part of American Constitution. Has been taken directly from clause 20. Now we will look at clause 12. No scutage or aid. Scutage is a kind of fee that was given by the barons or the knights when they are not able to provide the military service that was due. So in case when the king asks for military service and the barons aren't able to provide it, they had to pay a fine. That fine was scutage. Fine in lieu of military service. Or aid. Aid is a kind of tax that was imposed on the nobles. Is to be imposed in our kingdom, nobles or barons, except by the common council of our kingdom. Now what is common council? This common council consisted of nobles and clergymen, a group of nobles and clergymen. This is common council. So either a scutage or a tax should only be imposed in our kingdom by common council of our kingdom, unless for the ransoming of our person. Now ransoming was done when some important person or a relative of the king was imprisoned by the enemies in a war. So in that case, the common council was not required. And knighting of our firstborn son, when the firstborn son of a noble of the king has to be knighted or made a knight, there was a particular ceremony which used to be organized for this knighting purpose, to make the son a knight. So in that case also, a tax used to be imposed, or the money was asked, or a fee was asked by the king from the barons or other nobles. And for marrying one's or firstborn daughter, and for these only a reasonable aid is to be taken. So there are other purposes for which king for personal use could ask for money, or could impose a tax on these nobles and these barons. And there also a condition is there, that the aid has to be reasonable, which means you should be able to reason the amount of fees you are imposing, which means you should be able to tell that the money you would gather will be directed to what expense, or for what are you asking this much money. It should be reasonable. For example, if the ceremony costs 50 lakh, the king should not intend to collect 1 crore or 2 crore rupees. For example, this is just an example, and aids from the city of London are to be treated in like manner. So for simple understanding, you can just understand that the taxes could not be above a reasonable limit. This also gives rise to this concept of protection against excessive fines. Now all of these three clauses give rise to different principles, or on the basis of which American Constitution has included some provisions. And as you can see, through these laws or through such kind of clauses, the king has been subdued, or king has been made a subject of these clauses. King has signed that he has to agree, which means he is no more free to do whatever he wishes. He has to abide, he has to follow these clauses or the provisions of the Magna Carta, which gives us this concept of rule of law. The law will rule. So these are the elements in American Constitution. Similarly, in British Constitution, the due process and rule of law, these two ideas were only adopted. Now let us look at the prevailing Indian political scenario before colonial rule. So before the British came to India, we will discuss about the Indian rulers of those times and how did they belong to royal lineage. So what used to happen, the Indian society was ruled by kings for many centuries. There were few Ganasanghs which existed at some point of time. Ganasangh, what were Ganasanghs? Means instead of one king, a Sangh or a group of small rajas administered and ruled together. And they ruled with common consensus or mutual agreements. And even these Sanghs were having only kings as members. But these were very rare and very few. Mostly the population was ruled by rajas. In either case, there was never a direct participation of common public in any kind of governance. They had to follow what these kings said. And even the kings ruled over people not just based on military power, but also ancestral lineage. So every king used to associate himself or identify himself as if he is from some old royal family. So we will take an example. Let us take a very famous dynasty, Mauryan dynasty. A very famous king or the founder of this dynasty was, founder means who established this dynasty. Founder was Chandragupta Maurya. Well, he was not from a royal dynasty, But you can see his lineage ruled for long. His son Bindusar, and then Ashok, and then Kunal, and then Dashrath, Samprati, Shalishuka, Devavarman, Shatadhanvan, and uh, and many other kings. So even the dynasty which succeeded Maurya, this Mauryan dynasty, was established by the commander-in-chief of the last Mauryan king. So what happened? The last Mauryan king was Brihadrath. He was a Maurya. Brihadrath Maurya, the king who succeeded this dynasty, was the commander-in-chief of Brihadrath Maurya. So the commander-in-chief killed this last king. He killed this last king and took over the throne. But after he took over the throne, he had to perform two Ashwamedh ceremonies. Now, Ashwamedh was a kind of yajna, and this yajna was done to legitimize his rule or to make people accept him as a king. So, you see, there were religious beliefs like performing rituals like Ashwamedh yajna. So Ashwamedh was a ritual to establish the king as Chakravarti or uncontested. It had religious ceremonies and Brahmins had to supervise it. So there was a religious mythical color or side to the whole legitimacy of the king. Even the medieval kings associated themselves to epic dynasties. For example, let us take an example. There were Sisodias. They used to rule Mewar region. They used to associate themselves with Suryavansh dynasty. They used to say that they belong to Suryavansh dynasty, which is an ancient royal dynasty. Similarly, the Kachavas. They ruled Jaipur and they also associated themselves with this Suryavansh dynasty, that they are the descendant of Suryavansh dynasty. Now, this Suryavansh dynasty considered themselves to be the family of Surya or the sun, that they were the sons and descendant of the sun or the sun god. Similarly, the Bhatis of Jaisalmer. And Jadejas, these ruled Gujarat. Both of them claimed that they were from Chandravansh. So they used to claim that they are the descendants of moon god. Similarly, you might have heard about Chauhans. They ruled Ajmer and Delhi. In medieval time, they ruled Ajmer and Delhi. They claimed themselves to be the descendants of fire god Agnivansh. Similarly, there were Parmars. They used to rule Malwa region. They also claimed that they were descendant of fire god Agnivansh. So you can see that we can conclude that the society majorly accepted someone as a king who had either a royal lineage, whose predecessors belonged to royalty, or who were kings, who belonged to king's family, or who belonged to a royal family. And the second thing, there was an influence of religion. The religion played a very big part in deciding whether a person could be accepted as a king or not. Now you might raise a question that Chandragupta Maurya was not from royal lineage, then how did people accept him? So it is very important to note that he was made king by a Brahman. His name was Chanakya. So you see, the religion factor still dominates, still decides. Even when India was invaded by foreigners like Iranians, Macedonians, Scythians, Turks, Parthians, Mughals, and so forth, people didn't readily accept them as rulers. Though they couldn't oppose the kings, but they always considered them outsiders. So you can see the authority of these kings. The authority was well established. They had the authority, not just based on power, but based on dynasty, based on the based on the family background, and along with it, the religion. They were religiously high caste. Because of these factors, it was not common to see any wide scale protest or rebellion in the ancient or medieval times in India because of the authority of these kings. Even if a king was not eligible or not capable of rule, which means he was not an able ruler, people still couldn't protest against him or couldn't raise questions. There used to be few protests against high land revenues, let us say, or if there was corruption in some department or among the officials, or the higher officials were cruel. There used to be few protests localized in limited area. And one more thing to note is that these kings were not all cruel. For example, Turks and Mughals, when they invaded, so Turks and Mughals, for example, when they invaded, they used to raid, destroy, plunder the houses, the villages. They used to burn them, they used to destroy them when they didn't settle, when they didn't settle. During the invasion, they used to do this. But after they settled here, they ruled India as if this was their own motherland. So, whatever territory they controlled or they dominated, outside of that territory, they might have raided, they might have plundered, but within that territory, they didn't destroy the villages or homes. Of course, there was religious tension. They used to destroy or desecrate temples or religious structures, but generally they didn't used to destroy villages or homes of common people. So we see that there were only few protests. Well, there was one incident where people organized a protest against Aurangzeb. What happened was that Aurangzeb imposed jizya. Now, this was a tax. This tax was imposed on non Muslims. So, everyone except Muslims, whether they belong to any caste or any religion, every non Muslim has to pay this tax. It was a fixed tax which everyone has to pay, whoever was not Muslim. So, people protested against this imposition of tax. So, they organized a protest non-Muslims organized a protest to demand to abolish this tax. But Aurangzeb sent an army with elephants and crushed this protest. People were beaten up and the protest disappeared. Now this proves few points that there was religious tension always between the rulers and the Indians. Indians were majority Hindus. Rulers in medieval times under the Mughals and Turks who were Muslims, there was always a religious tension which was not visible normally, but under certain extreme conditions it used to be visible. Like in this case, there was a tax which was imposed. Now it brought two different religions face to face, so direct conflict was there, so protest arose. So ultimately we can see that it was not very common that the society thought of ideas like electing a leader among themselves, or modern ideas like rulers being subject to laws or whatever we have read, or make the rulers inferior to the laws, or set a boundary for the kings. These things, these ideas were almost entirely absent. These people still wanted a ruler who was indigenous or was religiously Indian and belonged to a royal background. Even if the king was from other religion, they somehow managed. There were few conflicts, but they somehow managed. They still tolerated the king. So we have seen that there were almost no protests before the colonial rule. The Indian rulers were from royal lineage and religiously legitimate because the society wanted them to be. Now let us see what happened when British came to India. So when British came to India and defeated these Mughals, Marathas and the successors of Aurangzeb and other local rulers who were ruling in different parts of India, British came and defeated them. Let us see how they did it. The British who came to India were not an army who was sent under some commander or some king to take over India. No, it was actually a company. The name of the company was East India Company. Now this company was given a charter. Now we have already discussed what a charter is. It is a document of exclusive rights granted to some company or some individual for specific trade purpose or specific action. So in this case, it was East India Company who was granted the charter. This charter was granted by the King of England. The charter was given to company to trade in the East. In the East. More specifically, India. Now when they came to India, they used to take permission from the kings. Now permission of what? The permission to set up or build factories. Now what is factory? This term you might have heard a lot, but if you don't have an idea, let me describe what factory is. Now these were not the places where something used to be produced. By that time, the mechanization was not done enough so that something can be mass produced using machines. So you can't call such establishment, or you can't define factory as a place where machines produce something in mass numbers. Now when the company took their ships and came to India, they came in big ships. Now the ships used to have enough stock to sell or items from England. When they used to dock in a port and they needed a place to settle or to store these items. Now what were these items? So remember, they came to trade. Now to trade, what should they do? They brought items from England to sell in India, and in return take the items from India and sell it to the people in England. Now at that time, Indian items were in high demand in all of the West, in Europe, in Middle East, in Northern Africa, and a much coveted item, which is pepper, was in high demand in whole of the Europe. They wanted to buy the pepper from India and sell it in their homeland. So when they came with these items, they wanted a place to store it. And whenever a local person has to buy, a local trader has to buy something, he has to come to this place where this factory was set up, or the storehouse you can call it for now, and has to come to this place to buy it. Let us take an example that when Vasco da Gama came to India, he brought items. He needed a place to stock and open a shop. He needed a place to stock these items or to store. And that was not enough. If you have ever seen shop, there is a part where the stock is kept, and then there is a part where you present your item. That is known as shop, where you arrange the items so that people would look at those items and they would know that these many items are sold by these shops. You can't keep all the items that you have in stock in your shop. And also, you cannot take your customers to stock where you have stored, because it would be very messy. You can't show the customer everything that you have in store if you don't have a shop. So they also needed a shop. So they needed a place to stock, and few articles they had to take and open a kind of shop where the articles are placed, and you can go and look as a customer all of the articles they are having, so you would know. So whenever you like an article you have to buy, you can ask the person that you like an article, he will go to the storeroom, take it and sell it to you. Now along with this, Vasco da Gama, because he was the owner of the ship, let us say he was the owner, it was his ship, it was his money and his voyage. Now of course, when he has to sell these items, he need to maintain the record of what was sold, of how much it was sold, how much profit he is having, or how much loss he is having. Record was kept for one more reason, that you may have a record that something is not missing, that some of your crew that came with you is not stealing anything. So you can see that it is safe to keep the stock at one place. If, let us take other case, if he had to distribute it into different places, ask the people who came with him to take these items to sell in different local markets, what would happen? Now one more thing, there used to be soldiers who used to come with the ships for the protection. There were pirates on the way, so there used to be navy, there used to be soldiers, there used to be crew, there used to be bodyguards, they used to have weapons, so enough soldiers used to be there. But if you send items to be sold in different local markets, you would distribute the army. Instead of one place where the army, where few army members can protect it, now you will have to distribute the army. For each transport or each local market, you will have to divide the army. So this army would be divided, which would make it dangerous for transport. This is a new place, India is a new land, they don't know the roads. There may be thieves, there may be dacoits, they may steal. And because there is limited army, when you divide, each of them get a little bit of the part of the army. Let us say 2 to 3 people each of them. But if you keep everything together at one place, the whole army is concentrated. They can fight any threat easily, efficiently, and with much force. That is also one of the reason why they needed a single storehouse. So it is safe to keep the stock at one place. And apart from that, if he decides to distribute it to the local shops, let us say he asks a person to take few items to the local market and sell it there. What could happen? The person who was tasked with this trade won't tell Vasco da Gama the real price or the real profit he made. So there is also that problem. So you can see, for this particular purpose, they needed a place to stock, to protect, and a place where they can store. Also, they would also, along with the stock, let us say this is the storehouse, they also want to live. So there used to be quarters, resident, and then there used to be shop. So the factory was a place where they used to have quarters, they used to have storehouse, they used to have a shop or a center where the local traders could come. The local means Indian traders could bring their articles, their items to sell to the Britishers, and in return they could buy British items. So it was kind of center where everything could be taken care just under the nose of Vasco da Gama. He could take care being present at one place and everything happening around him. He can supervise easily. Now let me rub this. Now you see what happened when they started establishing these factories. In a while, because they sought profit, they realized that trading with India is so much profitable for them. Because as I have told you, the demand for Indian articles were high in England. So whenever they used to go back and sell those articles in England, they used to make so much profit. But you can see that they were not able to make this trip often because they have to sail around the African continent. Now this is a very lengthy route. Each and every voyage takes a huge amount of expense. They have to prepare for months of food. They have to also arrange for that kind of money to sponsor this voyage. So they can't risk going to and fro many times. And every time they used to make one trip, they used to stay in India for months, trade there, and they used to send the voyage back. Now, East India Company wanted to trade for long, and because they wanted to trade for long, they had to set up these factories for longer time. They didn't want to leave this land of India where they were making so much profit. So the factories which were established, they started to live here permanently. So the army was always stationed in this factory. The ships used to make tours. Now as this factory grew or the profit grew, they started to expand the business or expand the trade. They needed more army, more personnel, more bodyguards. So they started to appoint or recruit Indian sepoys or Indian soldiers in their army. And they also realized that Indian soldiers are little cheaper to hire or to recruit than the English soldiers or European soldiers. So they started recruiting Indian soldiers because they were cheaper to hire. Now at this time, along with the British, there were other European powers who were trading in India, like France, Portuguese, and Dutch. And they were a big competition to British. So when this competition used to turn into conflict. Of course, when two parties are trading, they are having competition with each other. There is no one to supervise over them, so they would ultimately fight with each other. They are having soldiers, they are having armies. The conflict could turn into a fight. Because of these fights, the British wanted to the British wanted to increase their army. Wanted to increase army. So they started hiring more soldiers, more Indian soldiers. So now East India Company started hiring more. They needed bigger army. So over time what happened is, while they were fighting to these European powers, East India Company accumulated enough power, enough force or enough army. So army swelled. Now as I have told that these British used to take permission from the kings to set up factories. Now their business swelled up. They started expanding. Small kings didn't like the monopoly or the behavior of the British. Of course, it is king's land. He wants everything under his control. There are local traders whom the king wants to protect, and he can't see in his own territory someone else is accumulating force. So there used to be conflict between the British or between the East India Company and king. So what happened, because British already had recruited enough army, they accumulated enough force, they used to be able to win. They started winning. Against these kings. And because of which they gained confidence that they can fight in a foreign land with a ruler who ruled that land. Now, because the main objective of East India Company was to trade and to do business, so like every company or every business company, they also seek profit. They don't care about the people living here. They have nothing to do with the people or the politics till now. So whenever they defeated a king, they didn't use to take over the governance. They only used to make these kings or force these kings to give them exclusive rights to trade. So let us say if they defeated a small king of small kingdom, they defeated the king. What used to do before, what they used to do before, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch used to take permission from the king. They had already taken permission from the king to trade. Also the East India Company took permission, but because of some feud, some fight, East India Company defeated the king because of the force they had. Now they didn't used to care about anything else than profit. So their main motive was to drive these other European competitors out of this land. So they used to make kings sign an agreement. So the king and EIC or East India Company used to have an agreement. EIC used to ask for exclusive rights to trade in his territory, which means that no other European power would be allowed to trade in that territory except East India Company. So this is a kind of monopoly that was set up there. So we have seen they have gathered force enough. Now their force was so much accumulated that at one time they gathered 2000 soldiers from India. What happened was that in that in Battle of Plassey, 3,000 soldiers fought 50,000 soldiers. Out of these 3,000, 2,000 were Indians, 1,000 were European soldiers. And they defeated this army of 50,000, which belonged to Nawab of Bengal. And this was Battle of Plassey in 1757. So you can see the evolution of their army, the accumulation of the force went up to this stage that they were able to defeat a much bigger army. Another reason was the weapons they had, the muskets they had, the guns they had. They were well trained soldiers. They were very rehearsed with the guns. They had already fought with the biggest European powers like French, like Dutch, like Portuguese. Along with the experience, they had better weaponry. But you can see the amount of Indian soldiers they had. Almost double the European soldiers they had, and they were able to defeat these 50,000 soldiers. This happened in Battle of Plassey. Now look at one other major advancement, one other major war. Now in 1764, East India Company defeated a combined army of Mughal Emperor of that time, along with Nawab of Bengal and Nawab of Awadh and Nawab of Bengal. All of these three were defeated by East India Company. Now the Mughals were ruling over a vast area in India. So once they got defeated, their authority reduced over India. The British were able to take control of Bengal. At this time, in India, they were mainly concentrated in these areas, in Bengal, Bihar, UP, Eastern UP mostly, the Awadh area. They were also having a stronghold in Madras. In 1764, they defeated the combined army in Buxar. And as you see, they were having enough army to defeat the combined army of these three nobles, or the Mughal emperors and these two Nawabs. But even if they won, they couldn't take over the whole of India or the whole territory which was ruled by the Mughal emperor. So they took control of Bengal. They only took control of Bengal. What did they do? As I have told you that when they used to fight or defeat a king, it didn't used to take over as the government. They did not want to rule over India at this time. They didn't have enough army. They didn't have enough power. So what they used to do? They used to make kings sign agreement. They used to force these kings. So after this war, after the Battle of Buxar, over the years, the East India Company forced these Mughals, the Mughal emperor and other kings, to sign different agreements. The objective was to extract as much profit as they can. And why did kings used to sign agreements? Because they lost the war. British used to play a very cruel, a very cunning game. They used to defeat the kings and they used to show as if they are letting the kings live by showing mercy. They used to let kings rule the land in return of the agreements. The king would have the impression that the British were more powerful, but they didn't kill him, and in return, East India Company used to just ask for agreements. And what was the cunning game? The cunning game was this dual system of government which emerged in Bengal. Now let us look at what the dual system of government was. So when East India Company defeated the combined army in Battle of Buxar, the East India Company forced the Mughal emperor, the Nawab of Bengal, to sign an agreement to impose a dual system of government in Bengal. This was imposed on Bengal. Now under this system, company would perform police and judicial functions. The policing would be performed, the judicial functions would be performed. And these functions, or the right to perform these functions, were known as Nizamat rights. They also secured the rights to collect revenue, and this was known as Diwani rights. So they secured both the rights, policing, revenue, judiciary. They secured both the Nizamat and Diwani rights. The Nawab of Bengal, on the other hand, was responsible to maintain peace and order, which was a social responsibility which was given to him. So you see, East India Company took control of policing, which means they had manpower or force. Also judiciary, so courts were under their authority. Courts used to function under their authority. Now the revenue, they used to collect revenue, so the revenue goes to East India Company. Now the Nawab of Bengal, he was not given any power, don't have any police or force, can't collect revenue, no power, no revenue. So the Nawab had to take care of general public. And what were the function that he has to perform? He has to look at the needs of farmers. He has to look after the organization of Bengal, the maintenance of markets, like taking care of local trade. He has to take care of irrigation to provide water, and under him he has to maintain the records, land records, and taking care of general public. So when he is taking care of all of this, he needs funds. Now he can't collect revenue. So what he used to do, he used to beg East India Company, ask East India Company for the money, because money comes from revenue. Revenue means tax. Tax imposed on the people or farmers. Tax revenue used to be collected by East India Company. Nawab of Bengal had to request the company for the funds. This was the case in Bengal. So of course, East India Company would used to give very less funds. There was shortage of funds to take care of the farmers. What happened that when the Bengal Nawab was not able to take care of the public or take care of the agriculture or provide any kind of help to these farmers, it destroyed Bengal. This system led to a big tragedy. Because of this system caused the very infamous 1770 Bengal famine. People died of starvation. It stayed in place. This dual government system stayed in place until 1772, 2 years after the start of Bengal famine. Now this short glimpse is just to give you an idea of the intentions of the company. The intention was profit making, for which they exploited Bengal. So now let us look at protests before 1857. Why before 1857? Because in 1857 there was a revolt that we need to talk about. So before 1857 there were many protests and revolts in various parts of the country. The reason for these revolts were local, which means in different places people fought for different reasons. So for example, let us look at Sannyasi revolt. We will look at all these revolts in very short. This revolt was for a period of almost 37 years. So we have seen how dual system of government led to Bengal famine in 1770. So what happens in Bengal? Sadhus, sannyasis, the fakirs, they initiated a revolt. They were joined by zamindars. The fakirs started the revolts, the sannyasis, the sadhus initiated the revolt, then they were joined by zamindars. The lands of these zamindars were taken by East India Company. There were also, as I have told, soldiers who used to be recruited in the army under East India Company. Many soldiers were kicked out of the company army because of some reasons. Don't have to dive much into it right now. But you can see there were many factions of the society who were the victims of this operation or injustice by East India Company. We will also later look how these soldiers got affected. But for now, just remember this. And also the poor peasants who are being oppressed or whose livelihoods were taken because of the actions of the East India Company. So these sannyasis and zamindars and peasants and soldiers who were kicked out of East India Company, they started to loot East India Company factories. They started to loot the treasuries. They fought the soldiers of the company. This revolt was later oppressed by the British. It didn't achieve much, but it is one of the earliest revolts. It didn't achieve much. It was not a religious revolt. If you're thinking the name is Sannyasi, was it Hindu revolt? No. Both Hindus and Muslims equally participated. A very prominent figure of this revolt was Devi Chaudhrani. Devi Chaudhrani. This woman took the leadership even as early as this time, which is 1763 to 1800 in 18th century. A woman took over as a leader. Now a very famous novel, Anandamath, by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. The novel's name is Anandamath. It is based on Sannyasi revolt. It is very famous novel. So as you can see, the revolt was local and reason were the oppression and famine and suffering. This didn't affect other parts of the country, so you don't see the participation from rest of the country, which means the reasons are local, so movement or the revolt would be local. It won't spread to other areas. So after 1770s famine, movement grew stronger. There was also a revolt in Midnapur and Dhalbhum. Dhalbhum. Here the zamindars were dispossessed of their zamindari, which means their zamindari was taken, the land was taken from them. It was the reason of this revolt. There was a civil uprising in Gorakhpur and Bharej. It happened in 1781. This was caused due to excessive revenue demands. So in here it was zamindars. Their zamindaris were taken. Here in Gorakhpur, it was excessive revenue demands. Excessive revenue demands. In Kerala, in 1797, Parashi Raja. It is Z. Parashi. It is pronounced as Parashi Raja is also known as Kerala Simham. It was a fight by a Raja against the British. And at this time, Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan were fighting the British too. There was also Polygar revolt in 1795, around this time. Now these polygars are small kings of South India who fought the British. These were also kings. Similarly, there are so many other revolts like Paika rebellion. There was a revolt in Hathras, in Kutch, in Bareilly. So there was many of them, many of these revolts. But because of the differences in the causes behind the rebellions, no rebellion got any support from each other. The reasons were all different. The revolt was led by king somewhere, it was led by zamindar somewhere. So that is why these separate revolts were concentrated in limited areas. A thing to note is that these rebellions were not religious in color. They involved the participation from the masses, and the cause was not religious. So we have seen there were various protests. The nature of the protest was there were differences. They were segregated. Not enough connection with each other. They were non-religious. People were fighting for the personal causes. Differences in causes. Different causes among different protests. Now in the next lecture, means the next part of this lecture, we will look at the revolt of 1857. So total there will be 2 more parts of the lecture which I will post in upcoming days, so that we can get a very good foundation for us to approach the first article of the Constitution. Thank you.